welcome back to the show. So we're just doing another quick yet very casual chat on some key pop culture. Troy Howarth is here on the show tonight. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, very good. One topic we all just agreed would just be a fun kind of get together, would just be discuss some key actors that, you know, whenever you see them in a movie, you instantly go, hey, it's that one James Bond, 007 actor. Whether it's someone who played that iconic role or just was in a lot of those movies, that's a whole different story. But, just they kind of all ring together, just like when you recognize someone from Lord of the Rings or Star Trek or even a Twilight Zone episode.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just as a quick intro, how did you get into the franchise? Were you often watching a lot of the TV marathons that were on Spike TV or AMC? Or
I guess, my introduction was as a kid growing up in the 80s. We had one VCR, and had my older brother and I had to share it. And at that time, my interest was pretty much, laser focused in on horror films. I wasn't really interested in anything that fell outside of that too much. So I used to get a little bit annoyed because we would have to trade off. So if I watched the movie, then he'd get to watch the movie, and so on. And my stuff I was watching usually was like an old Universal or Monogram movie that ran maybe an hour to an hour and 10 minutes. He'd watch films that were like 2 to 3 hours long. It seemed a little unfair, but that's the nature of the beast. And
right.
The Bond film that came out the year I was born was The Spy Who Loved Me. Obviously, I was too young. Smuggled into a theater. I can't sit here and say that I remember that, but that's the first one I remember seeing, though. I remember seeing it on TV, and that was my, I guess for a period of time in the 80s, my idea of James Bond was Roger Moore. He was the Bond at the time, and it seems to me it wasn't until a little bit later that I started seeing Sean Connery, and he just seemed odd to me by comparison, because there was this guy who was kind of brutish and sort of hairy and thuggish compared to Roger Moore. So
right.
To him. Yeah, he's a little bit more heavy on the testosterone as opposed to Roger Moore is more of a pretty boy. I saw a bunch of them on TV as a kid. I was subjected to them. I didn't particularly like them at that time. But funnily enough, for reasons I don't really know, I became really interested in seeing License to Kill when it came out. I would have been 12 years old, and for whatever reason... It was
kind of catering to the Miami Vice Batman crowd, and it just,
Yeah, it just something, I don't know what it was. There was something about it. Maybe it was that. Maybe it seemed more modern somehow. I don't know. But the previews really caught me, and I wanted to see it. And I did. I went to see it. It was the first one I ever saw in a theater. And made me into a fan. So at that point, I went back and started picking up all the MGM-UA tapes, of the earlier movies and so forth, and kind of dove in that way. But it was kind of a gradual process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very totally. And it was kind of also like they were kind of critic-proof in a way. Like everyone was going to check them out, regardless of how they were received or thought of over time. It was always kind of came down to just, hey, they're on TV all the time. They're very over the top. They're very meticulous about sometimes being even thinking man's kind of action movies. And you just never know what you're going to get until,
Yeah, they run the gamut from kind of serious spy thrillers to just total cartoons, and I guess it's like any other franchise, any other tentpole thing. Whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek or nowadays with the Marvel films and the DC films and stuff like that, it's just sort of, as you say, sort of critic proof. They don't really care too much what the reviewers have to say. If people are invested in it, they're going to go. And if you look back over the history of the Bond films, how they've done at the box office, some of them haven't done as well as others.
Yeah,
but they all make money. They all make money. Certainly.
Even the IMDb, just how it's always being redone on the top 250. Plenty of those that I would always see had a positive review in like the TV guide you go online, they don't necessarily have a great critical score, like 40-50%. And it was just like, well, but either way, like you say, everyone went opening night. It's just, it was kind of, I guess you could say, kind of predicted the Friday night movie.
Yeah, basically. I mean, they've all turned a profit. Some have done a lot better than others. Obviously, some of them are huge, and some of them are more middling. But they all, everybody wants to be in a Bond film because there is that that appeal of being in something that people are going to see. And you can have a quote unquote serious actor who comes in and plays a villain or plays a character role or something like that, and they're always kind of happy to do that because obviously people are going to see it, and it's a good career move on a certain level. So, I mean, although Lord knows too, there have been a lot of people who turned them down, people who turned down playing Bond himself, and people who turned down playing various villains and so forth.
Right.
But by and large, it's something that attracts pretty consistently pretty high caliber of actor. When you go back through, there's a lot of really good people in these films.
There really are. More or less, you can just rely on them to carry the movie in many ways. Like the story is already arranged, knows what it wants to be, but like there are those occasions where you're just like, okay, so this is a little workman-like, or it's a little too goofy for its own good, or the tone's a bit all over the place, but you're just going along with it because, like you say, it's a twisted deal. But yeah, Connery is definitely a highlight, and Roger Moore is just kind of interesting because like there's so many who debate on whether he's playing Bond as his interpretation of Bond, or if he's literally just playing it like he played most serious roles, like he was already playing on the Saint. And I think some of them he's definitely still kind of comfortable being in the Saint mode, and others he's just trying to do something different. But it's very reliant on the movie's quality.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first couple that he did, it's clear that they were still kind of writing for Connery. And so there's kind of a leftover quality of that in the way that he's a bit rougher, like on the women, for example, in Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun. And that's not something that Roger Moore was ever comfortable with. As a matter of fact, he spoke out against that. And so they kind of started to tailor it to him a little bit more as they went along. But if you ever watch The Saint, I don't know if you've ever seen the series or not.
I have.
But, I mean,
yeah,
it's a good show. And I always thought, it's true. Moore wasn't he wasn't an actor who had enormous range, although there are a couple of movies that show that given a chance he could do a good job.
He can be goofy, he can be especially emotional in some movies, but yeah, like I say, for the most part he was often just given you're the guy going around trying to find out who killed someone, or
by and large it was cocking the eyebrow and tossing off one-liners.
Love triangle type movies. Yeah.
But I mean, if you see him in something like The Man Who Haunted Himself, which is a psychological horror film he did in 1970, just a couple years before he did his first Bond film, plays kind of a doppelganger in that film. Plays the good half and the bad half of this man, and he's very good in that. It's an opportunity for him to really act. But if you look at him in The Saint, I always thought that he seemed to me, in a way, he seemed more committed there than he did as Bond. As Bond, it was almost to me like he was too laissez-faire about it. He was just sort of tossing everything off too much. Whereas
you kind of see that with TV in general, because you just know, everything's all kind of set in stone, and you just got to have your parts kind of stand out. But yeah, I mean, you just got longer shoot days, and you're guaranteed to just be lasting, a full year. The rent's all paid for. You don't have to really worry about anything else. While with a movie, you don't know if your scenes will get cut. You don't know if you really want to stay at this hotel in this foreign country for this long a period. So yes.
Yeah, I'm sure there are all kinds of different factors, but when he played the Saint, it seemed like, for example, he had some really good, really convincing fight scenes in that, and he had a little bit of an edge in the Saint that I don't think he tended to have as Bond. Of course,
too many creatives with Bond, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, after a certain point too, they're kind of tailoring it to him, so they're kind of taking that edge off a little bit. Although For Your Eyes Only was an attempt to kind of get it away from the excesses and get it back to something a little more serious. But there again, too, he said in some interviews and things he was a little uncomfortable with some of the things he was expected to do in that film. So I think his approach to it was much, much more lighthearted, clearly, than Connery's was. Although Connery had a wonderful deadpan sense of humor about his performance, too.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Because, I mean, Sean basically got to illustrate everything he wanted to do as an actor. He's in all these various crowd pleasers throughout from the 60s to today, and then gets to show a lot of his emotional range for filmmakers like Sidney Lumet.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is definitely, I do wish some people would see some of those movies. It's like, no, you want to see Sean not really play what Sean typically plays, that you got to see.
Oh no! Watch the Lumet films, The Hill and The Offense in particular.
Mm-hmm.
The Offense is a brilliant film that unfortunately was not popular when it came out. I mean, I'm not a big Diamonds Are Forever fan, but I'm glad that he made it, because if it weren't for Diamonds Are Forever, we wouldn't have The Offense, which is a really, really intense. It's almost a horror film, really. Psychological piece about
even mediocre movies starring Sean Connery are more entertaining than most of today's movies, just because he
was a natural star. I mean, the camera loved him, and he just had a wonderful presence, and he was a good actor. I mean, it wasn't just that he looked good on film; he actually could play a wide array of roles too. Which, again, I think that was his irritation with Bond, in the same way that a lot of actors get irritated with being typecast, identify with certain roles, was that he wanted to have an opportunity to try different things. And that's why he went and did a film for Hitchcock, for example. He was in Marnie, did sort of offbeat things like
a very offbeat role. And like you say, it just, I mean, you even see him in movies which he was reportedly unhappy making, like Highlander 2 or what have you, and he's still a trooper, still just bringing it. Unlike other people who just when they're doing a movie they really don't want to do, unfortunately, the camera just has too good a lens to tell, or there's a take which wasn't their best take, and it just shows, unfortunately.
Yeah. There are certain actors you can tell, and I mean, I don't blame anybody for occasionally doing a piece of crap just to pay the bills.
It's going to happen, but it's just very unengaging when you see that,
when it's obvious. Yeah, when it's obvious.
Obvious, but mainly when it's like they're the main advertising point, and you're like, you should have advertised someone else as being in this, because this is not for that fan base.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I mean, when you get to the other guys, I mean, Lazenby was just kind of stayed in B-movie territory, being a former model and all, and obviously, Timothy Dalton has a lot of extravagant Shakespearean productions, which are definitely worth seeing. That dude, even though he's often a villain, or an anti-hero, he's just so good at just being unpredictable.
Well, Lazenby was amazing because he had no formal training as an actor. He was, as you said, he was a model, and he was hired over a lot of more experienced actors. I mean, they thought about using Oliver Reed, for example, who would have been terrific, but they wanted to have somebody who didn't really have a reputation, and sort of be able to mold him into a new Bond. And so Lazenby made sense. And it's funny, Connery walked away from the series because he was tired of the fact that it was kind of a one-dimensional part. There wasn't a lot of meat to it. And, he walked away just in time that they were doing the film where he would have really had an opportunity to do some real strong dramatic work. And here's Lazenby coming in, young guy, he was the youngest actor to ever play Bond at this point, and with no experience. And thanks to Peter Hunt, the director, ended up giving, I think, a really, really good performance. And I wish he would have stuck around for more. Unfortunately, as we know, he took some bad career advice, and he ended up leaving. He did go on to make some interesting films and give some good performances.
The Man from Hong Kong is practically a James Bond spoof.
Yeah. The Man from Hong Kong, he's a lot of fun in that, playing a bad guy. He's very amusing in Kentucky Fried Movie.
Just all these cult movies, yeah.
Yeah, and he's in a really good Giallo by Aldo called Who Saw Her Die. He gives a very strong performance in that. And he even did a little cameo for Peter Bogdanovich in Saint Jack. So the guy got to do some interesting things, but obviously never became a star in that sense. He's more of a footnote now, which is unfortunate because I really like him as Bond.
Fair enough. Yeah, he got what he could get. But yeah, just so going to Dalton, he's kind of, again, instantly rejected, yet plenty of fans dig his persona. So
yeah, no, I like Dalton. I know a lot of people thought he was too serious, but you had to go. It's interesting, it was like going from Connery, then into Roger Moore. It was like swinging from one extreme to another. Then it was Roger Moore to Timothy Dalton. Again, going from one extreme to another, then to Brosnan and Daniel Craig. They always seem to kind of bounce back and forth between the serious and the tongue-in-cheek. And Timothy Dalton was the ultimate kind of antidote to that decade, really, of Roger Moore goofiness that had gone on. Even though, in the similar way I said about Roger Moore being a little ill at ease with some of the stuff he was requested to do in the first couple of films he did, you do get a sense in The Living Daylights. There's a couple of bits of humor in that film that don't really wear too well on Dalton. That you kind of get a sense that probably that was written with Roger Moore in mind.
right. And I mean, that's just it with the tones and changings and all that. It's like, okay, again, good actors figure out the backstory regardless of, where it's all going.
Yeah, no, he did really well. And again, I wish he would have had an opportunity. I think, both Lazenby and Dalton, there's this misconception that they were, fired or they weren't welcome back. And it really wasn't true. Lazenby was, they had invested money into that. He was totally able to
Brosnan
do more.
was supposed to get it originally and then, still was committed to TV. So it's kind of annoying. It's like everyone gets an indicator of a 2-week notice before they actually get said 2-week notice.
Yeah. I mean, they had things worked out differently, but then obviously after License to Kill, the series got tied up in lawsuits for a while and everything. By the time they came back, Dalton thought he was maybe a little too old for it. So,
why do you think he got more bad guy roles? Because he just
he has an intensity to him.
Just the mustache and just the Shakespeare roles. You think just?
Well, I mean, he doesn't always have the mustache, obviously, but there is an intensity.
I'm talking more of his miniseries where it's like, especially the war movies he's in.
Yeah, I think it's an intensity thing. There's something about him. I think there was something about him that lends itself in particular to either anti-heroes or to playing villains. It seemed as though, some actors are kind of like that. One of the actors that was that turned down Bond, that actually turned down Live and Let Die, was John Finch, who had been in Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy and Roman Polanski's film of Macbeth. And I think he would have been a terrific James Bond, but he's another guy who had this real sort of edge and intensity to him. Actors like that very often find themselves often being cast as either villains or as kind of ambiguous characters. It just seems to be a better fit.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah. Funny how it all goes, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, it seems like Brosnan, just kind of had a similar thing where he would often show up as like the supporting guy who betrays a team, or just the handsome guy, and same kind of background, as Welsh actor Dalton, and then you look at all his TV work and other movies, it's like, man, just he was in a ton of spectacles, so he kind of had a similar kind of Sean Connery background, so I can already see why he had a similar kind of cult appeal. I can't think of anyone else besides, nowadays, probably someone like, Sandra Bullock or Jamie Foxx, who have that kind of instant box office appeal. Because, like, Brosnan just goes around. He must have, I think, my theory is he kind of has the same agent as Anthony Hopkins or Antonio Banderas. Because it's like, he'll get cast in just something. It's like, whoa, never even remotely heard of that. What is that?
Yeah.
And he'll be in this spectacle that's overseas, then he'll be in a bunch of these other movies, and you're like, whoa, I haven't heard of these, but It doesn't matter. No one's going to look at the rating, and they'll take it with a grain of salt because it was a limited release. Only 2 people saw it. It's just.
Yeah, a lot of these guys, I mean, Brosnan, certainly Dalton as well, I guess you could even say more. They were kind of, working actors. The kind of a lot of English actors that way. Think of Michael Caine, for example, or, Christopher Lee, to go into the Bond thing, of course. He played a villain in the series. I mean,
Right.
it's always, it's just if the money's there, I'm there. I don't care if it's just a little minor Czechoslovakian movie. I've got a hole to fill in my schedule. If you guys have got the money, I'll take it and I'll do it. So yeah, Brosnan's shown up in a lot of sort of off the wall things that you wouldn't expect. But he's shown up in some really good films too. He's given some very, very strong performances along the way.
I can't think of any role where, he just seems miscast for or anything like that, It just seems like he's pretty good at just fitting in, and just he understands how the camera can be directed to just about anyone.
Yeah, no, he's dependable. I've always thought of him as just a very dependable actor. Not somebody who's often had the opportunity, perhaps, to do, the best of roles or to have the best of opportunities. But I think everything he's ever done, he's always seems to have given 100%. Hello?
It helps that he's stayed away from just general, like, cliche roles. It seems like if he's not going to be the main person, and he's going to mainly be like a key, like, colorful role, and that allows him to inject the surprises that are needed for the various plot twists and other complexity. And I have seen occasional ones where it's like, okay, so he's playing an inspector, or he's playing what have you, just this kind of role, but the plot twist is that you just don't even know how he's going to personify it versus how it's actually going to be revealed, regardless of what the packaging tells you. So yeah, I mean, when I would even see people taking all these movies before these actors were better well known, I think he was probably the most successful. To just, everyone's always like, oh, I've never heard of that movie, but I'm just going to check it out. It doesn't matter if he's just 5-second role, just.
Yeah, no, he's kept busy. He's done a lot of different things, and some of them obviously better than others. But I
got to even work with his James Bond director Martin Campbell again on The Foreigner with Jackie Chan. So yeah, I would find it even more wild how I don't even know if he'll even use his natural accent or go for an American style accent.
Yeah, he's pretty good with that. Unlike it has to be said, Connery, who always
just can't let it go. The Scot.
No, it was all. I mean, it didn't matter. I mean, I guess he was supposed to be playing Irish in The Untouchables, but it's a Scottish accent the whole way through. He can't help himself, so it's just and probably just as well in something like The Hunt for Red October that he didn't try to do a Russian accent or something like that. It probably really was for the best.
Right. It's just it is what it is. Just can't help it. And more or less, Daniel Craig kind of a similar way where he just would, much like most of these guys, just often playing a soldier or a second or tertiary villain who is really pulling the strings. So when I saw him in like Tomb Raider and even a bunch of British TV shows and miniseries, like Sword of Honor is interesting, where he plays like a World War I soldier, having to use like some similar discipline for like in between like World War II type scenarios. I'm like, okay, so he's basically, that and Munich just introduced me to, okay, this guy's basically always playing some kind of operative. So of course he's now a spy.
Yeah. First thing I ever saw him in actually was Road to Perdition, and
sweet, okay.
I assumed he was American because of that, because he does an American accent in it. And
that layer cake, he gets to play a gangster who's not proud of who he is and has to find a way around.
Yeah, I had no idea who he was, but I just remember thinking, oh, this guy's really good. And then I saw him again, of course, in Munich, which you mentioned, which I think is a really underrated film. So he is another guy who I think he's got a good range because if you look at something like Knives Out, where he's just having a lot of fun doing
Even
this
letting him go AWOL to where it's like the accent's kind of out there, but
the sort of foghorn leghorn Southern Fried Detective. He's a lot of fun doing that, but he's another one who has this kind of intense quality to him. So not surprisingly, he made for probably the most serious of all the Bonds in many respects. I mean, this is a guy who barely flashes a smile in a lot of these films.
Barely, yeah.
But it worked. I mean, it worked for the films. I mean, I know some people didn't care for him in the part. I did. I liked him. I thought a couple of the
I
entries
think, like
were real
Roger
standouts.
Moore, it was a matter of, okay, Casino Royale is like, it's not going to get better beyond this. The rest are like it or hate it entries, but that first outing, man, he was really with it, and the production was one of a kind. And
yeah, my favorite of his was Skyfall. I really liked Skyfall a lot. That's one of my top three Bond films. But Casino Royale was a great debut.
Yeah, I think it's also just a matter of they just kept getting villains that were already kind of trying to steal his thunder, and he kind of wasn't sure if he kept wanting to do it because he was so proud of it, he almost killed himself. And I think that was just coming from the wrong perspective. He shouldn't have tried to kill himself, making these complex movies.
Yeah, well, I mean, it became after a certain point, it was like, you knew he was going to be up against an Oscar winner every time after a certain point, because it's just like,
that can be intimidating.
We'll get Christoph Waltz, and then we'll get Javier Bardem and Rami Malek and so forth. And, he was up against some very, very strong actors for sure, but always held his own. I mean, I never felt like he was totally blown off the screen, even by a performance as extravagant as what Javier Bardem did in Skyfall. I didn't think he ended up, suffering badly opposite him.
I felt like it was too much of his show, not enough of his.
Yeah, Bond. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's my favorite of his, but I could see that. I mean, it's a very extravagant characterization. I mean, it's one of those movies, I love it dearly, but if you think about it a little too closely, it doesn't really hold up. But that's true. That's true of a lot of them, really. If you start thinking too much about the plots, sometimes you're better off just kind of going with the flow because they don't always hold up too well.
Oh, well, that's just it. Where with all the plots of those, it wasn't too hard to figure out the first time around for me. Well, with Sean Connery or Dalton or Brosnan, it takes a while. It's like, hey, wait a second.
Yeah, definitely.
Whoever it is who plays him next, best of luck. You got a lot of competition.
Yeah, I mean, they keep talking, don't they, who they're going to cast, and the same names keep coming up all the time, and I just keep saying, they're too old. It's not going to happen. They don't crank these movies out.
Years ago, it should have been Ian McGregor or what's his name, Hugh Jackman, but they didn't go with either of them.
I'm not familiar with Ian. Ewan McGregor. Okay, yeah, he would have been good. Hugh
Clive
Jackman would have been good. Yeah. Clive Owen, I don't know, he seems to almost kind of dropped off the map a little bit. I don't remember the last time I saw him.
He does a lot of supporting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he had a brief period of time there where he was a big draw. He'd have been good. Tom Hiddleston would have been good.
Hiddleston comes off to me as more of a villain. He just.
I could see him playing either, but I think he could have pulled off a decent Bond. Actually, the guy that they ended up casting as M after a certain point, Ray Fiennes, back in the day, he would have been a good choice too.
I guess I'm just so used to just seeing him as a villain. He just has that intimidation factor.
Yeah, but they keep talking about people like Tom Hardy, and the guy's already 44. That's not old, but you're not going to start somebody playing this part when they're in their 40s. It just doesn't make sense because it's not like
just going.
It's not like back in the old days when they used to crank them out once a year. Craig played the part for about 15 years and only got 5 movies out of it. It's not very realistic.
Well, and they're going mainly for whoever attracts the most investors versus, no, I really want to see you in this role. You're perfect. And part of the fun with James Bond was kind of like some of the crime TV shows. Cast unknowns, people who have been around for a while, who have a certain look and a certain amount of skills.
Mm-hmm.
instead of, well, he's just the first person I see and he's famous, so let's cast him.
Yeah, it's almost, again, it's like you want to get somebody who maybe isn't as well known as all that, so you can kind of establish him in that part, and therefore you're not going to have a lot of competition. Because I know Henry Cavill's another guy they keep talking about, who's already strongly identified as Superman. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable piece of casting, but I don't know. I have a feeling they're going to surprise us.
Yeah, totally. And regardless of whether or not they tested these guys, if anything, I think they're more likely to be villains or comrades or supporting personas. As we don't even know if they'll continue the whole, I always consider it a code name. I know that's unpopular for many, but I'm just like, okay, well, if there's all these other money pennies and M's and
right, and
Q's.
I never used to think that way until the recent one, because of what happens in the new one. I do.
Oh, even as far back to Brosnan's last one. Remember how John Cleese's character, all of a sudden he's next to Q because
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, given the way the last Bond film ended, I do wonder if they're going to start. They've got two options open to them. One is to reboot it, and one is to say it's a code name. So, I guess they could go either way with it. But code name to me, really, when you think about it, if you think in terms of chronology and everything, Casino Royale is supposedly the origin story. That's the first one, and there's no way that Casino Royale, made in 2006, is set before Doctor No, made in 1962.
And each time
and everything else,
anyone even, it's wild. The producers are just too proud of the property to where they just don't want to be compared to anything. Even though many people noted, shots that were similar to Taken, Born Identity was noted as being the key style, and they're like, it's like they had a press release. Yeah, we're trying to be like that. And then when people start comparing, they're like, oh, but we're different. It's like, well, it's okay to be compared,
Well, it's what happens where you go from being the trendsetter to being the follower, and I think that's a source of embarrassment sometimes.
Even the new Mission Impossibles is like they both had similar plots with the new Bond movies, to where it's like, okay, so I mean, every spy is working off the grid. It's just someone was inspired.
Oh, sure.
I find it even funnier how the original Moneypenny, Louis Maxwell and the original M. Bernard Lee, some of those guys would star in some of those James Bond, knockoffs like Operation Kid Brothers. It's so funny to see them show up. Adolfo Celli is kind of like Christopher Lee. And where everyone just sees him pop up and they're like, hey, that guy, wasn't he a James Bond, villain? And it's like, of course. And so
I mentioned before that, Oliver Reed had been considered to play Bond. And the funny thing is, around 1969, he starred in a movie called The Assassination Bureau, where he plays a secret agent, and he's opposite Diana Rigg, Telly Savalas, and Kurt Jurgens, all of whom are strongly connected with the Bond series.
Especially Savalas,
Savalas, of course. But Savalas and Rigg would have been opposite Oliver Reed and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So, I mean, it's just like,
someone was listening to the auditions and the talk of the scene, and Desmond Llewellyn, it's just so wild how he's the original Q, but he started like later in the game as opposed to just from the start, and you're not really surprised at what kind of giant TV productions he would do, let alone how he would just show up on just atypical kind of British TV that unless if you were in the States, you probably only saw it casually while tuning through PBS as opposed to all the time.
Yeah, I saw Desmond Llewellyn pop up in a couple of Hammer films. He's in The Curse of the Werewolf and Sword of Sherwood Forest. He's not even billed in them, but I recognized him right away. I was like, isn't that cute?
Right. It's like he was a featured extra or something like that. But it's even funny just seeing how many 90s TV ads you can find where he's basically playing homage to his iconic role, and it's like nice.
Sure. Yeah, no, he was a mainstay for a long time. He wasn't in Doctor No, I think he came in on From Russia with Love, if I remember correctly,
Yeah,
and he was
17
there all the
films.
way. Yeah, he was there for a long time, and obviously only left because of unfortunate tragedy. He was in a car crash, so that was the end of that. But he did more than anybody, So he was the big recurring player out of all those actors.
Totally. It's even funnier how some actors became connected because of the Canon Films knockoff. Never Say Never Again, and once again, the ones who were doing some of those Italian, cash-ins would eventually become part of the franchise, or were, like you say, originally considered, but whatever reason
Yeah,
they
I
pass
mean,
on it.
Never Say Never Again. I mean, that was interesting because that's coming out the same year as Octopussy, and that's putting Roger Moore versus Sean Connery. And I have to admit, Roger Moore came out on top in that one. I thought that was a better film.
Yeah,
But if you look at some of the actors that they attracted to be in Never Say Never Again, it's pretty impressive. I mean, Max von Sydow as Blofeld is the best actor to ever play that part. But unfortunately, they gave him nothing to do, so he doesn't really make much of an impression. So
yeah.
ultimately, I think Telly Savalas came off as the best one on the whole.
Well, and that's just it. You're only as good as what you're allowed to do, and I mean, even some of the people they picked as like Bond girls, it's kind of the same thing where you're just like, well, I mean, they're cool, but they didn't give them anything to do. So
Yeah, the first couple, I mean, they were eye candy, but they started with Goldfinger to start beefing up the female roles a little bit more, and certainly by the time of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Diana Rigg had a fully formed character to play. So obviously, some actresses made a better impression than others, largely for that reason. But it was always more about the glamour, really.
yeah. Well, and so let's talk about Judi Dench a bit. It's just such an iconic role. I couldn't stand to see her leave the franchise, and it seems like I just was never surprised when I saw her appear in stuff like Miss Brown, starring Gerard Butler, who was also in Tomorrow Never Dies and could have been a cool Bond. But basically, he's doing James Bond now with those Olympus Has Fallen movies. So
Yeah.
It's just so wild how I would just see her pop up, and anytime I heard just some kind of mysterious, thick female voice, I'm like, of course, it's Madame Dench. Of course it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she became like the go-to casting after a certain point. If you need a lady of a certain age, get Judi Dench. But she was always delightful to watch. Even this year, she's in a movie that's up for Best Picture called Belfast, which I haven't seen.
Oh, totally. Bunch of crowd pleasers. Exotic Marigold Hotel is a good example. Yeah, it's just.
But I can even remember back, a film from the mid '60s, a Sherlock Holmes versus Jack the Ripper movie called A Study in Terror, where she plays the young heroine in that. So it's kind of fun to see her in a context like that. And I mean,
So you watch a lot of TV, so I take it you saw her sitcom as time went by.
Oh, as time went by, yeah.
And I just
the other actor that was in that series with her, she must have had it in her contract that he was in everything with her because he was in a ton of things with her. He's even in a couple of the Bond films. I can't remember his name right now, but the actor played Lionel on that show.
Yeah, I was going to say that because it's like, he pops up as one of the generals at the beginning of Tomorrow Never Dies, and I was like, he's see what you everywhere.
Did there. Yeah, she must have had in her contract or something.
I'm sure. I mean,
think not that it's bad to have him. He's a good actor. It's just kind of funny every time you see her, he's not going to be far behind.
Oh, totally. It's no coincidence. People talk and give recommendations, and sometimes the producers actually take them up on that offer.
Yeah, but I mean, the weird thing about her in that part, and she was wonderful in the part, was, they established her obviously in the Pierce Brosnan films, and it's like, again, if your intention is to make Casino Royale into how it all started, why didn't you cast another M? Because it doesn't really make any sense that it's still her.
They were pretty much, that was the precursor to Star Trek, the newer ones, where it's like, let's just go into mindless Star Wars fodder instead of actually be philosophical and just so you don't get annoyed, it's all a mirror universe. It's the only way it works for everyone. I'm like, well, if it's a mirror universe, technically it doesn't really exist in it's kind of like pasting in deleted scenes that are fun but don't really have any,
right.
friction. So it's just a tough predicament after a while. Do you ever
Yeah, I
light
mean,
up? Sorry, go ahead.
she was. Oh no, she was established in the part. Obviously, they liked her, and that's all the more reason. It's just one of those things when you stop to think about it, it's like, well, really, it would have made better sense at that time to have gone back and got somebody different. But
Have
it's
her mentor and then use some CGI to make her look a little younger,
maybe that, or
or
there are
just
any number
another
of different,
actress similar.
or another actress, another actor, whoever. I mean, there were any number of different choices that would have been good for the part, but then, but she, Skyfall gave her a good exit, obviously, and then bringing in Ray Fiennes was an interesting choice. Although whether he'll continue with that part, I don't know.
Good question. More or less. What's your take on Colin Salmon? And you might know him as the African British guy who is often plays Robinson, who's M's assistant.
Oh well, I
Bros.
mean, yeah.
I remember he was teased as the next Bond, and that never happened, obviously. But
no, I can't say he really stood out to me that much, to be honest with you.
All right. It was more on just rewatches. He kind of just stood out to me that way. He would just have a few wacky lines like, here's what 007's up to now. But
yeah, that kind of part.
He doesn't really have as much in some of the earlier ones, but I just associate him with that role because he just appeared in just similar shows later on, like Spooks and Strike Back and 24. So I'm like, yeah, of course he's going to be the go-to guy who plays a Joint Chiefs or some other British operative who's going to give some key exposition.
Yeah, Mr. Exposition. That's always a popular character in this type of thing. You need the guy that's going to kind of recap everything for the audience. Sometimes that's integrated better into the plot than others. Sometimes it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, definitely like Q, there are times where it's like, glad he's here, but you're not going to notice what he actually does for the movie unless you rewatch it a few more times. So
Sure. But I do wonder, again, it's like I said with M and everybody. I mean, Moneypenny and Q and everybody else. I mean, the question at this point is, are they going to recast everybody, or are they going to carry on with the people they've already gotten established? And I'm not entirely sure about that.
Yeah, and when one of them passes away, are they going to is the estate going to just sell it to the highest bidder, or is it going to go to someone else who is in the family and wants to have their shot at it? And will they ever hire any people who have constantly said, hey, before I die, I want to do a James Bond movie, but I've been denied because I'm just too obvious a pick?
Right. Yeah, I mean, they've had that happen, obviously, with Bernard Lee. He died, I think, during the making of Moonraker. That was certainly the last one that he did. And there was a period of time where they were, it was like they were uncomfortable trying to recast the part. So they just kind of had stand-in M, and they had people like Robert Brown coming in, but he's not really M, but he's kind of M, until they reestablished it with different actors and so forth. So it's tough when you have somebody who's really identified with a part. I mean, it's very difficult to ask the audience to just forget that they've been watching somebody for 10 years and all of a sudden it's somebody different.
It's like, well, the cake is a lie.
Yeah, it's bound to happen. I mean, if you look at even just Bond himself, I mean, the danger is if you have somebody who hangs on to the part for too long, it starts to look ridiculous, and that's what happened with Roger Moore. By the time he got into the 80s, his youthful good looks were starting to crease a little bit, and it was starting to become very obvious. I mean, he was Grandpa Bond by the time he's in A View to a Kill. It's kind of, it's impossible not to notice that.
Totally. And I think that's a good summary of how, I mean, you have all these other guys who have been in a bunch of stuff like Rory Kinnear and Ben
Mhm.
Wenshaw and Eva Green and Naomi Harris. So it's like they definitely got a star boost, even though they were already kind of iconic and recognized for a bunch of other international and British movies and shows. So it's going to be interesting seeing, yes, where it goes from there. Overall, would you also sum up that it just seems like uh, you literally can just do one of these pictures and you're set for life. Like everyone's gonna invest in you or just put you on the cover, or that's gonna be your top billed movie, even if you didn't do anything else. Like Sakata, whatever his name was, who played Oddjob. Again, he will always be henchman Oddjob in Goldfinger.
Yeah. I mean, never mind all the other things that they do. That's the thing that they're remembered for. Sure. I mean, it's something that Connery fought against for a long time. As I said, it was the blessing and the curse. It made him a star. But, there is a certain level where, is there a lot of real acting that's involved with James Bond? Or is it more just sort of, having the right attitude and the right kind of, presence? And if you've got those things, then you're pretty much home free. So if you're an actor who's really looking to be taken seriously and maybe to win a prize or two and
look elsewhere,
sort of be feted by your peers and everything else, you're not necessarily going to do that, starring in a James Bond film, especially playing, because very often Bond is less interesting very often than the villain. So the villain's usually the one that has all the real scene stealing stuff.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, it's not going to be the same every go around. So the worst it can be is the villain's cool but not interesting per se, or again, Bond. We like Bond, but that outing they didn't even give him much dialogue. He pretty much just shows up whenever he has to kick ass.
Yeah, I mean, I always used to think that a Bond film is only as good as its villain, but that idea is rather turned on its head by a couple of films. One is The Man with the Golden Gun, which has a terrific villain and is not much of a film. And the other is The Living Daylights, which is a wonderful film that's got two very unmemorable villains. So it's not always a constant with that, but usually a Bond film.
I really like Daylights, but good luck naming any of the villains. Pretty much for that one, I'm like, hey, it's a who's who of the Fugitive and Die Hard type, blockbusters.
Yeah, Joan Crabb and Joe Don Baker. I mean, they're fine
there's
actors,
just too
but
many.
They don't have good roles.
So it's like, well, who do I follow? I'm already trying to figure out what's going on, because I mean, you open up the movie with a training montage, and you're realizing, oh, he's shooting them with blanks. It's not a real mission.
Yeah,
just to get your attention, get you in the mood.
Yeah. Whereas on the other hand, you have a really terrific villain in Scaramanga and The Man with the Golden Gun, and Christopher Lee plays it so well. And he really is kind of, the dark side of Bond. I mean, he is like, he's the flip side of the coin, and he's terrific. The movie is not very good. So it's just, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes that happens. There have been other villains that people didn't seem to like very much that I liked more than they did. I know a lot of people don't seem to particularly like Kurt Jurgens as Stromberg in Spy Who Loved Me, for example, but I thought he was great.
Well, I think, again, it's because of the role he's playing, where he's, playing a bigoted deputy. But I don't think it has anything to do with the performance. He plays it very well.
Well, no, he's the villain. I mean, he's the...
Okay, I thought that was the name of the guy who plays one of the coppers.
Oh, no. That was Clifton James, who played the J.W. Pepper. No, Kurt Jurgens was the villain. He was the guy with the underwater, thing.
Oh, yes. He was cool. Even Yaphet Kotto. There you go. He's already a star for life with Alien and a bunch of other movies and shows, Homicide, but he's just so wild out of all things. He can say, I played a voodoo African stereotype. That may not have aged well, but it's still interesting to see someone perform in that difficult.
Well, he was the first. He was the first black villain, first black, certainly primary villain in a Bond film, I guess. And he played it well, but I mean, there are aspects of that movie that have not aged well. There's certainly a lot of aspects of a lot of the '70s ones in particular that do not.
Yeah, good luck getting anyone to agree on anything being politically correct as James Bond. So,
well, especially when you get to something like Mr. Winton, Mr. Kidd, and Diamonds Are Forever, the two gay henchmen. I mean, that today would not fly at all. And to this day, that's still hotly debated. Although, I mean, to me, that movie is just so over the top silly that it's almost impossible for me to take it, too seriously.
It's definitely one of those where it's just like you're better off accepting it as just a cartoon, which unfortunately it's often one of the lower ranked ones just because there's a lot of dead space in it.
There's good things in it. The score is really great. It's one of John Barry's best soundtracks, I think. I love the score. It's got a couple really good scenes, and I think Connery's really good in it. I think he's much better in it than he was in You Only Live Twice.
He has some great fight scenes, and I actually like Jill St. John, but they often get mocked.
Yeah, no, she was good, and he plays it really, really well. I mean, he seemed disinterested to me in You Only Live Twice, and it didn't help that they put him in that ridiculous Asian makeup as well. That was not the
that's just it. I really like that one, but yeah, his performance is very annoying because, like, even when he's going around, chop sake, it's just like, he seems to want to just do everything in one take, and you're like, this isn't how this works.
No. But he's really good in Diamonds Are Forever, but that's the one I've always been like, I wish George Lazenby would have come back, because if he would have done that film, it would have been a gritty revenge film about avenging the death of Tracy, as opposed to what it became, which is essentially an Austin Powers template.
Oh, well, totally. And even the parodies like Austin Powers and Kingsman, after a while, are going to basically become parodies of their own selves if they go on too long. So you just kind of can't win. You just got to say, okay, well, here we are.
And then you get to something like Moonraker, which I just can't stand.
And that's a shame too, because like it has a cool premise, and yet I've seen people remark about it. I'm like, well, good on you if you can get through it. I certainly can't. It's just too dull. And
I think the first half is okay, but once it gets to outer space, forget it. I'm done. I checked out.
Oh, man. I fall apart just once I get to the castle, and the rest is just like really bad Star Wars effects and everything.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. But
it's just so funny because the main villain in that, I recognize him instantly. Anytime I see him playing a mad scientist or just a diplomat, from some European country, and he's in. Yep, and probably his best movie to date is probably Munich, but he's just immortalized because he was in a James Bond movie, even though it's often one of the.
In pop culture, I mean, in serious, more kind of cineast terms, he's known for doing films for like Joseph Losey and Louis Buñuel and people like that. So
there you go.
He has an impressive CV, but the average people on the street, they're going to be like, who? But you say, what was his Hugo Drax? Oh, okay. Although in that movie, he looks very much like Richard Nixon in a Nehru jacket, which is a little bit unfortunate, but he's fine. He does a fine job, and it's got another really nice soundtrack by John Barry. But God, all that outer space stuff and bringing back Jaws and giving Jaws a girlfriend. I mean, get out of here. I can't deal with that one.
Yeah. Wacky, but too much for its own good. In fact, I would say the video games probably did it better.
Well, the movie itself was like a video game, but yeah, I'm sure it is. I mean, it's really a great example. And The Man with the Golden Gun was kind of a similar thing where they're throwing in everything but the kitchen sink. So during that period, the kung fu craze is big. So all of a sudden, you just get some really gratuitous kung fu worked into the film for no real reason. It doesn't advance the plot. And so Moonraker is a similar thing where, Star Wars is really big. So, hey, let's put James Bond in space and have laser battles. And I'm sure it looked really state of the art in 1979, but nowadays, it looks bad.
Oh, boy. Well, I think we pretty much summed up a lot of the MVPs who, like you say, you can't spell pop culture without James Bond, so here you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to continue. I mean, we've got 25 films now, and it's been 60 years since it started. That's pretty amazing. I suspect they'll continue making them. I mean, I think if they had one do badly at the box office, they would probably take a chance and do another one. But I think, especially given how expensive they are anymore, if they had two in a row that didn't do well, that would probably be the death knell. So whoever they cast, they have to be careful about who they cast, because I know there are a lot of people who have been talking about, let's try something really radical. And that sounds interesting and all that, but I think they would be very afraid to go that far afield of what's already established, because the blowback could be pretty intense and it could affect the sales. So ultimately, they don't want to kill the goose that's laying the golden egg.
Well, all the best luck, because the last thing I want is just toxic fandom like Halloween and Star Wars were suffering in recently.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, okay, this is James Bond. You're going through this, even if you think you're going to hate it. It's one of those things. Like, whether you see it in the theater or on home video, you can't ever say, yeah, no, I'm never seeing it, or I'm not going to watch it again. Because that's the other funny thing, too. I see people who, they're like, I grew up hating that one. Now I really like it. It's like, well, this is how it is. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I the only reason I didn't see the last one theatrically is because of the whole COVID thing. Unfortunately, it just wasn't comfortable going to a theater. Otherwise, I would have. I mean, and tragically, that's one. This is like the biggest spoiler of all time, and somebody just casually told me it online like it was nothing. So I knew going into the movie how it ended, which was very disappointing. But I still enjoyed it anyway. I thought it was a really good film. I still need to think about it maybe a little bit more before I figure out where it quite falls in the big scheme of things. But there's certainly ones that I love very much. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is my favorite. I love From Russia with Love, Skyfall, Doctor No. And there are other ones that I don't like as much. But even when they come out with one that's a little bit of a dud, like you said, I'll be there to see the next one when it comes out. I really didn't dislike any of the Craig ones, to tell you the truth. I mean, a couple of them weren't as good. I didn't think any of them were bad.
It's funny which ones keep getting turned around. I just figure out them by day. There's just some that have just a few rough spots where it's like, okay, that's fine as a standalone action movie. That doesn't really work for me as a James Bond movie. It's just
sure.
Sure. I think that's just it. They kind of had a bigger identity crisis because they were just trying to be as big as the current other blockbusters. And it's like, no, the best part about James Bond is it doesn't have to worry about what it is trying to be. It just has to be James Bond.
Yeah, the formula has been set for years. I mean, the formula has been set for 60 years. We haven't really come that far from Dr. No at the end of the day.
I enjoy parts of, I know this is sacrilege, of both Spectre and Quantum, but I don't find the villains all that remarkable in them. It's just, what does it for me is just how they lean in on Bond's dark humor and how he's literally steroid induced, and how he literally has to back off with like a bunch of dirty martinis, and they go into that psyche a little more. That's what I like. But yeah, the villains.
I think where they went wrong with Spectre was trying to connect and Blofeld to him as a relative. I think it was a bad idea. I think Christoph Waltz is a wonderful actor who was not very good in that film. I don't know why. Maybe he needs a director to kind of rein him in a little bit better, and he just kind of went. I don't know. I didn't.
It was definitely the writers running out of ideas, and I don't know why they even hired the director when he was on record as saying, "I don't like Craig as Bond." I'm like, well, then don't hire him.
Yeah, there were mistakes in that film, but I'll tell you what, the first half of Spectre I think is a damn good film, and that pre-credit sequence is terrific. So there are good things in it. Quantum of Solace, I actually don't mind the villain in that. I think he's a very good actor, Matthew.
I like the conspiracy and everything, how it's all connected to the world's water. It's just, it's more of it's more like an episode of MI5 or 24 rather than, it's a James Bond movie.
I thought he was fine, actually. I thought in a more realistic kind of context, he was quite a reasonable choice, and I thought he gave a good performance. My big problem with that film is I just don't think Mark Forster knew how to direct action. So you have some very, very chaotic and confusing, in a bad way, fight scenes and action scenes. There are times in that film where I'm totally confused because it's just so chaotic.
Thing. I'm just so used to the Taken Born Identity style of editing. Like, the only person who doesn't do it for me is Chris Nolan. He's great with mystery, but I can't do his action. And for whatever reason, I can see all the tracking shots and nonstop action on Bourne just because I'm used to seeing something like that, where like steady cam on something like the Shield. So for me, I could see all the fights, but don't get me wrong, they could have done a few different edits differently, especially with the plane chase, where it's like appropriately intense, but there are other times where you're like, that looks like an expensive reshoot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't bad though. I mean, I honestly, I don't think any of the Craig films are bad films. If we're talking bad, in my opinion anyway, I would say a couple of the Brosnans and certainly a couple of the Moores fit the bill.
Oh yeah, Die Another Day was not the right way to end Brosnan's
legacy.
that
was lousy. That was
and
lousy,
it's a shame because I really dug Halle Berry as the Bond girl, and yet you have again 2 uninteresting villains. Rosamund Pike's since gone on to be a pretty cool persona, but I was just like, okay, so the script, again, the tone is all over the place, and there's heavy use of CGI. It's trying to, again, cash in on all the other spy movies instead
the
of just
invisible car and all that stuff, the surfing scene. I mean,
that was too silly. Yeah,
it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. The World Is Not Enough was not good either, in my opinion. But
what's funny is I dig it, but I don't. I understand completely. You know, it was in that post Star Wars level where the acting was uninspired, and but that one I like how there's no central villain. But don't get me wrong, that's part of the flaws as well, where there's a few too many villains. You're like, hold on, who's in charge?
Yeah, exactly. But he started off very strong with GoldenEye. I still think it's a really good one. And I think Tomorrow Never Dies is pretty good. Actually, I think Tomorrow Never Dies was probably the last one that runs under 2 hours. So it's actually
before they became almost 3-hour movies. And Jonathan Pryce, it was an inspired villain choice. But
yeah, he's a good actor. But
if you see character. Have you played any of the video games?
Me, no, I'm not much of a gamer.
Oh, good. The Everything or Nothing game, I think, was just a proper send-off because you had all the voice actors coming in and some motion capture. William Dafoe was a villain, but not only did they use his persona, but they had him as like he had been mentored by Christopher Walken's Max Zorin, so there was a cool connection, and you got to fight Jaws, the henchman, Richard Kill, and that was cool because it's like, okay, that's a proper send-off for Brosnan's character, and he returned to play, the persona, and it was just inspired gameplay and a fun plot, and you're like, see, that would have been a fun movie, and instead, we got all these other ones that too big and loud.
Willem Dafoe would be a good choice for a Bond villain. I think he would be a good Bond villain for sure. And Ian McKellen, why not? Ian McKellen.
Hell, I'd rather him be like a mentor, like a retired spy.
You could put him in as M if they recast it at this point.
That would be awesome.
As a kind of Q type or something, you put him in as a villain.
A Q type would totally make sense. He'd come up with like super like soundproof bullets or something like that. Yeah, he just.
I'll tell you who I think would be a good Q, and it sounds ridiculous on the face of it, but I don't know if you're familiar with the British series, the IT Crowd.
I totally know who you're going to go with that one. Yeah,
Richard Ayoade would be perfect.
I would love to see any of those guys. I would love to see, get a Who's Line comedian on there. I don't care. It's just someone who is they can do geeky and informative at the same time. And
I think he would be great. I really do. I think he would be great. And
they probably could do it already, and just for whatever reason, everyone just thinks, I don't know, because they're too dry or they're too witty, they can't be a certain way. But so many comedians can continually really surprise people, unlike ones who are continually let off a leash. And I mean, in all fairness, a lot of them were writing a lot of their own material. So I mean, we saw the best they had to offer on IT Crowd.
It was like, unfortunately, poor John Cleese, who I love, they brought him in, and it was a mistake the way they did it, and it was too goofy. But I mean, the guy can actually play a dramatic part, and I think, if they would have given him an opportunity, given him better material, maybe he could have established himself in that part. as opposed to just being kind of like, oh boy, that was a bad idea.
Yeah, he got to play the part again in a bunch of other video games.
Yeah. But I definitely think, oh my God, I think he'd be such a good M. So, who knows what they'll do. Like, as they may bring Wishaw back and all these other people.
Hell.
If they do, that's fine.
Any other Monty Python star would have been welcome. That is for sure.
Oh, Michael Palin. Work Michael Palin in too. Why not?
He would have been a great villain, or M. He would have been fine.
Mm-hmm. There's all kinds
Graham Chapman, had he lived to see the light of day.
Sure. Or even, obviously, it wouldn't have worked because he played a villain, but I always thought Christopher Lee would have been a good M.
He would have been great. Maybe Terry Jones would have been a fun villain.
Terry Jones.
A dimwit. Henchman.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Right. All kinds of, so many people that, were active in the British film and television scene and whatnot. I look at and think, boy, they would be really good. You mentioned Willem Dafoe. Sure, he would be a good villain in one of these films. Why not?
They can't have them all be Brits. They got to have some international stars. They could bring in a few Hong Kong actors. That would be great.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think it would be really, they're only limited by their imagination after a certain point as far as who they're going to get and what they give them to do. So I'm very interested to see where they go with it. I'm curious to see who they cast, if only just to shut people up about, they're going to cast this guy. It's like, they're not going to cast somebody who's already in their mid-40s. It's not going to happen. Another actor they keep talking about is Idris Elba, who I really like. The guy's 50. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and he's already done plenty of other spy movies and other stuff. He gave us 2 awesome crime shows. I really don't need to see anything else from him. He can do all these stupid voiceovers and overrated blockbusters.
Yeah, he's a marvelous actor. And unlike a lot of people, after all of the changes they've had with these actors, in terms of their looks and their builds and everything else, if you were going to have a Black Bond, I don't have a problem with that if you get the right guy to play it. He would have been good in his prime.
I think Chiwetel Ejiofor would have been great.
Yeah.
I've seen him in Dirty Pretty Things, Salt, and Children of Men. So I'm just like, okay. But at the same time, unfortunately, a lot of our celebs are going to be doing financial security, just because there's just not a lot of projects that they really want to do, but they still got to do 2 a year to make, bills.
Exactly. So there's all kinds of potentials for what they're going to do and how they're going to go with it and everything. I'm curious to see. I've been a fan for a long time. I don't like all of them. There's some of them I could certainly go without watching ever again, but there are many of them that are just great comfort food. Go back and watch over and over again.
Totally. See the spectacle before it became oversaturated.
Yeah. Well, it's an institution at this point, I suppose, and it has evolved over the years. Certain things have changed, and certain attitudes have changed, and so forth, and that's as it should be. But I think there are a number of actors who would be reasonable choices. Just at this point, your guess is as good as mine. Who they're going to go with, I don't know. Cillian Murphy is another guy who could have been a reasonable choice.
Oh, totally. He seemed like now. As close as we'll get as Inception. That's as close as he got to playing a James Bond villain.
Yeah. And even, believe it or not, back in the day, there were a few American actors that they looked at. They did, believe it or not, they did look at Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds turned it down.
Sam Neill's screen test is a joy to watch. Anyone who
Sam Neill, well, he's a wonderful actor, and he would have been a good Bond, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Clint Eastwood, they've talked about Clint Eastwood at one point. That would have just been strange, but they thought about him.
Yep.
And
I think Adam West tested, or
Adam West. Adam West. John Gavin was going to play it until Connery agreed to come back for Diamonds Are Forever. He was all set to go. He's the actor who played Sam Loomis.
James Brolin tested. Yeah.
Brolin? Yeah. Lots of people.
It's crazy.
It's amazing to think what a Burt Reynolds James Bond would have been like. But who knows? Who knows? If he can do, I think the criteria there, as long as you can do a credible English accent, unless they decide to, just throw the nationality out the window, which they can't really do. if you can do a reasonable English accent, then, why not?
Just go for it. All right. Well, this has been a joy to have you on here. Anything you would care to promote or plug?
Oh boy, promote and plug. I'm not very good at promoting myself. I've written a number of different books on European cult cinema. Right now I have a book that's in the works on Italian director Umberto Lenzi called Make Them Die Slowly, which will hopefully be out in the spring.
So you're a huge Giallo fan. Nice. Yes,
very much so. I've written several books on the Giallo. I've written books on Dario Argento and Mario Bava and Lucio Fulci, and yeah, that's my big obsession. So a whole lot of books out there and a whole lot of audio commentaries as well on different Blu-ray releases.
Sweet. Any other Blu-rays that you might be doing audio recordings for, being a film historian?
Well, there's a bunch that are to be announced yet. I can't say, unfortunately, until they clear it. But yeah, there's a bunch coming. There's a bunch more that I'm going to be. As a matter of fact, this weekend I'm going to be recording another one. And
any companies that you often do it for?
Yeah, a whole bunch. Severin, Blue Underground, Synapse, Scorpion, Kino Lorber, Arrow Video. God, off the top of my head, I'm terrible at this. I mean, that's
how did you get the opportunity?
I was given the opportunity actually after I'd written a book called So Deadly, So Perverse, which is all about the Giallo films. And Arrow Video, a guy who produces for Arrow Video named Michael McKenzie, was kind enough to offer me my first chance to do a commentary for a movie called The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, which is a Giallo from 1972 with Erica Blank. And, so I did it, and I guess I did good enough job that they keep asking me to do more. So as long as they want me to do them, I'll keep doing them.
Sweet.
We'll return after these messages.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
We let things pile up in the DVR, we add them to our queues, we wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters Podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.
Cool thing about Blind Knowledge is we are in multiple countries. We are worldwide all across the globe. We are in the US, we are in the UK, we are in Canada, Germany, India, Japan. We're in Australia, y'all. BlindKnowledge.com. Now back to the feature presentation.
Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, all things that we love, all manga that were originally published in the legendary magazine Weekly Shonen Jump.
But not every series can run for 300 chapters and have a hit anime. This is David.
This is Jordan.
We're the hosts of Shonen Flop. Each episode we look at manga that ran in Jump that didn't quite make it.
We discuss what it did wrong, what it did right, how the series could have turned itself around, and ultimately, was it a flop or not?
We're on all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find us at shonenflop.com.
Keep on flopping, floppers.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening. It's a